Evening. Hello there. You hadn't turned me on yet. Good evening. Welcome to the July meeting of the Rocky Mountain Creation Fellowship. We are so glad that you came and are able to be here to share with us this wonderful opportunity to learn about God's creation and the fact that the Creator wins. And we have a great speaker tonight to help us to understand the latest discoveries in creation science. Before we get to that, I want to mention a couple of announcements. At special request of some unnamed people, I made some more copies of Dr. Bergman's presentation. So I have about 5 of them left here, and they will be on the book table during refreshments if you'll please come and purchase those. I don't know who ordered them, but I made them anyway, okay? So those are available to you. Now I want to talk about a little program that we have put together at our last Board of Directors meeting. You know, sometimes I'm so grateful that all of you, the faithful, attend these meetings and help us to be a force for God in this modern culture. But sometimes I get really disappointed that when we bring Dr. Bergman all the way in here from Ohio, and we don't fill the house. We need a program to get people here, and we spend all this money to fly the guy in, and we have a lot of empty seats, and it just doesn't add up. So here is the program that your board of directors has committed to solve that problem. I'm going to ask you tonight to join with us. Each one of the board of directors is copying a flyer announcement of each meeting off of our website, and later Fred will show you where that is on the website. And they are taking it to their church and pinning it on the wall as a bulletin board. So in all 7 churches represented by the board of directors, from now on there's going to be an announcement of every speaker every month on their bulletin boards, okay? Now here's your chance to make the same deal with your pastor. I'm going to pass this around and ask you to sign up. Give me your name, the name of your church, and your pastor. And by signing up, you're promising me that you're going to go talk to the pastor and get his permission to stick that up on the wall once a month. And Fred has them on the website almost immediately after each meeting. The next one goes up. He's already got the one up there for next month. Pardon me? Yeah. So let me send this around and ask you to sign up, if you will. And by so doing, make a promise to coordinate it with your pastor. All right, thank you so much for that. Now there's another thing we can do, and that is, have you thought about bringing a friend? I mean, if you read the announcement for Fred Williams' background here, you must have been excited to go tell your next door neighbor, look who's going to be speaking. You need to come and hear him speak about the latest discoveries in creation science. So that is phase 2 of our attendance program, which is to ask each one of you to start bringing a friend, okay? And it's so easy. You know, I've got neighbors on all 4 sides, I think, at this point that have come to at my request. I attend a Wednesday morning Bible study breakfast. And so those guys get recruited every month. And I'm sure you all have circles like that you can get the word out and get them over here, okay? So let me encourage you to do that as well. All right, at this point I'm going to introduce our speaker for the evening. I regret that Dr. Boudreau could not be here again this month. They're having a flash flood in Thornton, and he called me about 5:30 and said he couldn't get out. All the streets were flooded, and In addition to that, he's still kind of having to take care of his wife, Caroline, who had a bad fall and has a real sore back, and he was hesitant to leave. So I'm sorry he's not able to be here. Our speaker, Fred Williams, you may know if you listen to Real Science Radio with Bob Enyart. Fred and Bob do a Real Science Radio program every Friday afternoon. Starts at 3:30?
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock. Starts at 3 o'clock. So just flip over to AM 670, KRKS, and catch that program. It's really good. They batter back and forth. It's kind of like a Mutt and Jeff. Yes? What? Oh, KLTT. I'm sorry. Thank you for fixing that for me. Yeah, it's KLTT, AM 670. And it's a wonderful program, and I urge you to catch it because it'll keep you up to date. And Bob Enyart is just so dedicated to bringing the truth of creation, and he also promotes all of our meetings. So we're very grateful to Bob for providing that airtime, both for us and also for Fred, who gets a chance to get his word in against evolution. In addition to that, Fred has been a debater for probably over a decade, and he takes on the evolutionists on the chat rooms on the internet. And he's also got a lot of good material on our website. Just really, I would say, a major contribution that Fred has made over the years. He serves for the Creation Research Society as their webmaster as well. So he finds time to keep our maintained while he's doing their big job, which is just released a whole new website that's just come out. It's just fantastic. It has the slideshow that comes in and out, dynamic, and when are you going to do that for ours? Ours has that too now, does it? Oh, okay, that's good. So, he's really dedicated, and he's given an awful lot of time out of his life to serve the Lord in this creation science movement. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Fred Williams.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bill. I really appreciate that. And I don't know if you know the kind of work that Bill puts into this. For years, he's been doing both the sound and the video. And man, I love this new facility. Here's Bill right here, able to enjoy this. Now we got the church is providing a sound man and a guy to run the computer. Let's give those guys a big round of applause. I mean, I am so thrilled how great this place is. So my name's Fred Williams. I've got a Bachelor of Science in the electrical engineering. Right now I work for Micron. And those little sticks that you put into your computer, if they don't work, don't blame me, but that's what I work on. So, and actually larger scale ones. So we're going to go over tonight the latest in creation science. What I thought I'd do is, over the last year on the radio program, I went back through the archives and I kind of pulled out my favorite stuff. So we'll talk a lot about a lot of the latest stuff, and I'll mix in, some of the older stuff. We'll go down memory lane on what have been always great arguments for creation versus evolution. Okay, so this is the new website, and what Bill was talking about that we'd like to encourage people to do is on the right-hand side, as always, will be the announcement of the current speaker. And if you look right here, this is where you can click on that and print the flyer. So it'll always be available as soon as the speaker is posted, which should be, it's automatic now as long as we get it uploaded to the website. As soon as my talk's over at midnight, I think by sometime tomorrow morning, you'll see the new speaker and you'll be able to print out the flyer. So, and also, Bill reminded me, so on July 12th, if you can see there, whoops, let's try this thing here. This is great. Right there is a Yellowstone Safari. If you haven't signed up yet, Ed Bellman, how do you say Ed's last name? Jolman? Ed Jolman, I've been on one of his tours before, and he does a fantastic job. If you have the time to do this, I'd highly recommend it. If not, he does them. Hopefully he'll do another one next year. I really regret that I couldn't make that one. And then finally, on July 26th, there's going to be Creation and the Flood Geology field trip with some guy named Steve Austin. Anyone here Steve Austin? Dr. Steve Austin? So if you haven't, he's very high up. He's very well known in the creation movement. He's got a PhD in geology from, I think, Penn State, I believe. So anyways, that'll be really good. He's going to be down in Colorado Springs going on a tour, and that should be fantastic. So as Bill mentioned, we do Real Science Radio. I'm a co-host with Bob Inyard, and he apologizes that he can't be here tonight. He's in Indiana working on a video animation for the hydroplate theory, so he wasn't able to make it tonight. So anyways, we have a great time. If you don't hear the show on Friday at 3 o'clock, they're all archived at rsr.org, and they're also on podcast, for whatever that means. I have no idea how to do a podcast, but a lot of people do. In fact, driving over here, my brother in Missouri just recently got interested in creation, like a year ago. And now he uses podcasts. Again, I don't know how that works. But he listens to all the shows, and it was real encouraging talking to him coming to this meeting just tonight. And he mentioned how he was on a board. Someone posted, it was a totally unrelated topic, but they said, religion is the cause of all wars. Well, because he had been listening to the show, he was able to jump right in on that board, and started talking about, how, giving evidence against that, supporting the fact that, it's actually the belief in evolution and atheism that has led to the most destructive wars in our history. So Larry jumped in and engaged him on that, and what was really cool was he got into a creation argument, and he presented the fact that, we've got some moons that rotate backwards, have a different retrograde, and he said, well, that goes against physics of the Big Bang. And then a PhD physicist jumps on that board and goes on, started bragging about his credentials. And Larry says, well, what about the law of conservation of angular momentum? And that he said that PhD guy responded, he says, this Larry guy's got a good point. I never thought of that. It does fly in the face of that. Basically, what that law says is if you're on a merry-go-round, and let's say you got football players and they start pushing it really fast, you got kids on it. They'll start, as they fall off, if you get going too fast, everything will spin in the same direction. That's that's one of the laws of physics. And so Larry pointed that out. If the Big Bang is true, and if the way our solar system formed, why do you have some moons going the opposite direction, et cetera? They shouldn't. So, okay, anybody see this debate? So that was a really good moment. We interviewed Ken Ham on the radio show a couple days before the debate. It was, I think, about a 2-hour-long debate, and so we'll go over some of those points tonight because, we thought, it's always easy to armchair quarterback. We thought Ken Ham did a great job, but there's only so much time to deal with the stuff that Bill Nye's throwing out there. So I wanted to take this as an opportunity, too, to go over that. We covered a lot of it on the radio show as well. Okay, whoops, we're getting too careless with the old button here. So I want to first give you an idea what evolution is, just as a reminder for a lot of you. Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but just as a reminder, evolution has long been taught, or neo-Darwinism, is mistakes in the DNA, mutations, which are mistakes, okay, plus natural selection. So let's look at that. So what's interesting, here's out of a high school textbook. It talks about evolution and that beneficial mutations are the raw material for natural selection. So that's one of their big mechanisms. They have to have those rare beneficial mutations. So they admit that the rare mutation, like most mutations, is harmful. So what's interesting is whenever you have things like this in your textbooks, a sec here. Why don't they ever give an example of a beneficial mutation? They're so, and when they try to, like on the boards, we could talk about those. They're not really examples of increased information. Okay, so here's something we talked about on the show. This report came out in December of 2013, about 7 months ago. So they discovered a second code hidden within the DNA, which is remarkable. We've had Dr. Kevin Anderson here. He's got a PhD in microbiology. He's touched on some of this, but this is a different finding, and this is really cool. So just to kind of give you an example of what's going on, the DNA is a manual. The DNA does a lot to tell the body how to, build proteins and the cell to do a lot of work. The DNA is actually there's so much that goes on in the body, but the DNA is a big part of it. So, for example, it might have coding instructions to say, build a protein that's an antibody to fight infection. Well, at the same time, you might want to regulate that. So you might have another instruction that says, add more when it's cold outside. So what this is we've got two codes, superimposed on top of each other in the DNA. I mean, that's remarkable. How does that happen by chance? I've been a firmware engineer for 30 years, and we don't have programs that can do this. You follow the instructions, the machine code, and it goes one way, and it only produces one language, one set of instructions. So what happens then if you come along and you do have a mutation? So, for example, that part of the DNA gets mutated. Well, now both things aren't going to make sense, right? You've just corrupted two instructions in the DNA. It's going to be awfully harmful. And so here's what the doctor said, who was part of the team that discovered this. The fact that the genetic code can simultaneously write two kinds of information means that many DNA changes that appear to alter protein sequences may actually cause disease by disrupting gene control programs or even both mechanisms simultaneously. Now, of course, he has to still bow to the altar of evolution, so he says, these two meanings seem to have evolved in concert with each other. You see that a lot in the scientific literature. They seem to have done this because they can't explain it. It's remarkable that you have two codes on top of the DNA. In fact, Kevin Anderson showed examples of where there's actually up to 14 ways a DNA can code a protein. Can you imagine reading a book one way and it tells one story? Read it from the back to the front, it tells another, because the DNA is read backwards too. Or read it three-dimensionally. Read it, diagonally. Read a book diagonally down a page, and it tells a totally different, coherent story. It's remarkable. So yeah, we got to get out our baloney detector when we see the bowing to evolution. Here's what a famous evolutionist, James Shapiro, said. He said, there are no detailed Darwinian accounts for the evolution of any fundamental biochemical or cellular systems, only a variety of wishful speculations. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now let's talk about the other mechanism, and we'll do a really quick course on natural selection. Just really quickly go through this. So imagine we have a male and a female bear, and they each got a gene for short hair and a gene for long hair. So this is kind of a crude example of a Punnett square, but it gets the point across. So based on that, you're going to get a variety of bears. You're going to get some short-haired bears, some medium-haired bears, and some long-haired bears, okay? So natural selection. So what happens if an ice age comes along? So we get an ice age, and let's see here. Those guys don't fare too well, okay? So then over time, over several generations, or who knows, it could be one generation, eventually the bears that have the long-hair gene survive. So you've lost the gene for the short hair. Now what's amazing about how God programs the genome, a lot of times these are just suppressed now, and you'd be amazed how some of this can come back. But generally speaking, that's how natural selection works. It removes information. It doesn't create anything new. You're just shuffling information you already have, and you can't create out of that something. You can't grow a new organ because of natural selection. So when you do, for example, selective breeding, we know that the wolf kind has a lot of, that is very genetically robust. It doesn't have a big genetic load, doesn't have a lot of mutations compared to, for example, you go down the line, and it's well known among veterinarians that poodles, unfortunately, if you're a poodle lover, they're not real healthy dogs as far as they got a lot of mutations. They got a lot of harmful ones. So they're not as healthy, and so that's loss of information. So now that we understand natural selection, I want to get back to the debate, because Bill Nye threw this slide up and he said, no, there's no gorillas in this slide. And he just shows this slide. It's an illusion, because then he doesn't really say much about it other than there's no gorillas in here, as if this is somehow supposed to prove human evolution. So when I saw that slide, the first thing that came to my mind when I'm watching that debate was that slide. Okay, you know what those are? So, I really like number 9 here, Did anybody see Predator? I mean, it's kind of a goofy movie. To me, that looks like Predator. If you saw that more up close. Well, what this really is, these are a bunch of dogs. They're all dog skulls. Does that prove that the dog evolved into the dog? Well, yeah, I guess it proves that. It doesn't prove anything about evolution. Those are all dogs. This is a slide that coming up that I'll get to that in a second. I wanted to again kind of touch on this whole natural selection. So evolutionists came up with the term microevolution. They need to get the word evolution in there. Microevolution, everybody agrees with. I do, Bill does, creation scientists do. That's small-scale change. That's where something like a lizard, you read in the newspaper about how a lizard evolved these different pads on his feet to adapt to his environment. Guess what? He's still a lizard. Okay, that's microevolution. Now, macroevolution is when they claim that the lizard or something like a dinosaur over time becomes a bird. That's macroevolution or molecules to man evolution, and that's religion. That's not true. They have no evidence for that. And we've talked some about that, but the scientific evidence for that is very lacking. So getting back to so here's something I saw. Study cast doubt on creationism. We're going to talk again about natural selection. So I've always liked this slide because, first of all, they're admitting that there was no doubt on creationism before, this report. Study cast doubt on creationism. Look at what they're claiming here. They noticed that the size of the St. Bernard dog over like 120 years, the size of his skull changed shape. Big deal. How is that evolution? They're claiming right there it can only be explained through evolution and natural selection. Then the very last line in the article says they have evolved purely through the selective considerations of breeders. It's selective. It's not even natural selection. It's breeders selecting traits. That's artificial selection. So that's not even microevolution in a kind of strict sense. So again, you see this stuff, and it's microevolution. The dog is still a dog. Okay, so something else that Bill and I said in the debate is evolution makes predictions and creation doesn't. We'll take a look at a lot of evolution predictions and creation predictions as I go through my talk. So just as an example, and we do, on our radio show, we do what we call list shows, like the list of not-so-old things. Now we've got a show that we call list of predictions, of creation predictions. And you can go see those at any time on our website, and you can listen to once a year we'll have a list show. We'll cover that same topic. But some of the famous ones, like when I first saw Bob Enyart before we became friends, I saw a debate that he had with Eugenie Scott back in 1998. And he had asked her, what are your 3 best evidences for evolution? She only mentioned 1. She didn't mention 3. She mentioned 1, and it was junk DNA. And Bob said at that time, I predict that over time we will find that junk isn't junk DNA. So we all know that that's been proven true, right? That there's no junk DNA. I don't have to show a slide on that. You can go check on the internet, check secular sources. There's no junk. The junk DNA is pretty much gone. Excuse me. Another great prediction that a lot of creationists might be familiar with is when Dr. Russell Humphreys made his magnetic field predictions of different planets' magnetic fields, the magnetic field strengths. And then the Voyager and Messenger satellites later on proved those. So he published those predictions in a creation magazine, and then the data came in several years later, and it confirmed his predictions and totally contradicted the scientific community completely. The Hubble deep field images would look like nearby galaxies. That was one we predicted, and sure enough, when the Hubble deep field images came in, we saw galaxies with the spiral arms, and they shouldn't have those spiral arms anymore if they're really old, right? Because Newton's laws, the stars wind up be like a clock screw, you shouldn't have it. The evolutionists call that the winding up problem. So we got tons more on the show. I'll highlight a few as we go through here. So this one in March 2012, we had an article in our hands on this lake that they found in Antarctica. They discovered it, and it was 2 miles under the surface. So Now, because it's so far down, they think it's been sealed off, and there's been 15 million years have gone by. So what a great laboratory experiment for evolution, okay? Because 15 million years have gone by. They claim we evolved from a chimp-like creature 5 million years ago, so this is 3 times longer than when they claim that we evolved from a simian ancestor, okay? So they're expecting to find all kinds of evolution, all kinds of adaptation into that environment that fits the evolutionary paradigm. So we made a prediction that they're just going to find everyday life in that lake. So here we go, July 7, 2013. This gets published. They finally had a look at all this stuff, and here's what they found. I'll show you an excerpt from the article. Sometimes this thing's a little finicky. Okay. Many of the species we sequenced are what we would expect to find in a lake. Most of the organisms appear to be aquatic, freshwater, and many species that usually live in the ocean or lake sediments. All they found were modern-day life forms. That's an evolutionary prediction that did not come true, and a creation prediction that did come true. Here's another one. You know, they claim that evolution, a lot of evolutionists and a lot of people believe, well, we should be getting better. We're evolving. I mean, whenever you hear the word evolve, it implies you're improving. Now, they'll say, yeah, it could be, it's just change too, but generally speaking, evolutionists think that we're getting better, yet evidence comes in all the time that we're not. And here's an example. They did a measurement where they compare reaction times, and they did this over 100 years ago, and then they did it again, and they discovered that our IQ would be 14 points less than our 19th century ancestors. So each generation, we're getting just a little bit, our IQ is going down just a little bit, our reaction time. So I gave a talk at a high school about 2 months ago, or whenever. I can tell you exactly when I gave that talk because the next slide is exactly the day. So this is the day before I gave a talk, 28 April 14th. I'm like, well, I got to add this slide because look what this slide says. Modern humans have become weaklings compared with our ancient ancestors who could outrun and outlive today's top athletes. So more evidence that over time, through generations, that we're not evolving into, the mutations slowly, gradually accumulate. I mean, God's blessed us with a DNA system that has a remarkable quality control system. Mutations are very rare. But because we're in a fallen creation, we are slowly, each generation, just very slowly, getting less fit, or however you want to call it. Definitely goes against the evolutionary paradigm. Okay, so here's another illustration I wanted to show you. So our chromosomes, as I mentioned, over time, if you go back to Adam 6,000 years ago, I'm using baseball as an example that just imagine as we come to today, we build up a genetic load. We accumulate more mutations over time, slowly. Where did Cain get his wife? Married his sister, right? A lot of people freak out at that. But the Bible said Adam and Eve had many children. Well, this is Adam and Eve's time, okay? There's no mutations they could have had. You could marry a sister and not have any genetic problems. So God did not outlaw incest until around this time frame here, Exodus with the law when it was given to Moses. Then he outlawed incest. Remember, Abraham married a half-sister. So when the genetic load got too large, that's when God said, okay, we got to stop having close relations. Okay, so why am I showing you this? There's more to it than that. What's interesting is the male Y chromosome doesn't change a lot. Each generation, it only takes very, very few changes, okay? Very few. Now, they can use the Y chromosome for genetic genealogies and whatnot, but it doesn't change very much. It's pretty robust. So this is a crude example. Again, there is some small change. I just want to give you the idea that it's conserved more than other chromosomes. So what's interesting is across the globe, when you look at the Y chromosome, it's pretty similar among everybody, okay? And they, we trace the Y chromosome back to, well, we could say Adam, but really back to Noah, right? There was one Y chromosome on the ark. Noah and his sons, because the Y chromosome only goes from dad to son. That's the only way it goes. Okay, so if you're an evolutionist, you would make a prediction, and they did. So they knew of this. They knew that the Y chromosome was, at least in their lingo, it hasn't changed much in the last, 100 million years. They think it changed a ton in the past. But anyways, we'll get to that. So we would expect it not to be that different in a chimp because they think we're related to a chimp. If this thing doesn't change that much, then it shouldn't have changed that much in a chimp that was related to our supposed common ancestor with the chimp. That's what's expected. That's what evolutionists predict. This is what actually happened. The chimp's Y chromosome is incredibly different. Here's from Science Daily. The results overturn the expectation, the prediction of evolution, that the chimp and human Y chromosomes would be highly similar. Instead, they differ remarkably in their structure and gene content. Here's what the guy who wrote, the scientist who reported on this in Nature magazine. He said that, and this guy is of the Whitehead Institute of Biomedical Research in Cambridge, he said that in the journal Nature, that the human and Y chromosomes are horrendously different than each other. Is that a scientific term? Between 30 to 47% different. Horrendously is not a scientific term. He said that because it contradicts his worldview of evolution. He continued to say the difference in the MSY gene content in chimpanzee and human is more comparable to the difference in autosomal gene content in chicken and human. Horrendous indeed. Oh, here's a quick, just for your, Okay. So this is an article that came out fairly recently in ICR. I thought this was really cool. I don't know if you saw it. So this guy's got a PhD, Nathaniel Jensen, I think from Harvard, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty sure it's from Harvard. And he's now a creationist. He's got a really interesting study here. So he looked at the mitochondrial rates between, all humans. And if you look at the top chart up here, if evolution is true, this should be how many differences you'd expect in the mitochondrial DNA, given about and he's estimating over about 180,000 years. If in just a 10,000 year time frame, we'd expect a range between 7 and 16 DNA differences, and this is what we get. So which one matched the prediction? Which one fits which worldview? Same thing here with the fruit flies. This was what, if evolution is true, you'd expect that. If creation is true, you'd expect that. This is what the data says. Same thing with roundworms. If evolution is true, if creation is true, and here's the results. So pretty neat study. We covered that on a radio show not too long ago. Okay, here's another slide he threw at us. We never, ever find a higher animal mixed with a lower one. We do all the time. So, for example, and I could give you so many more examples, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to show you a couple. Okay, so this is according to Dr. Donald Burge. He's a curator of vertebrate paleontology at the College of Eastern Utah, and he said this in their museum, that mammal fossils are found in nearly every dinosaur dig that he has ever been associated with. We find mammals in almost all of our dinosaur sites. These were not noticed years ago. We find duck feathers. They say they ruffle feathers because they don't like finding them in the Cretaceous. They found a squirrel in the Mesozoic. They found a mammal that eats dinosaurs in China. So here's what a creationist said appropriately. To the surprise of many, ducks, squirrels, platypus, beaver-like, and badger-like creatures have all been found in dinosaur-era rock layers along with bees, cockroaches, frogs, and pine trees, all documented in the scientific literature. Okay, here's another great, this is a prediction an evolutionist made. So here's another one we can see if it came true. This guy was a famous evolutionist. His name was J.B.S. Haldane. In 1949, he said that evolution could never produce various mechanisms such as the wheel and magnet, which would be useless till fairly perfect. At that time, the cell was still pretty much a black box, but he made this prediction, and if evolution is true, that's a reasonable prediction. Well, we know that that's been refuted, but this next slide, the wheel, a magnet, gears, and then if you look at this next slide, look what they found in a jumping, it's like a jumping insect, plant hopping insect, functioning mechanical gears. Now, I wonder what Haldane would say if he saw that. Now, he'd still bow to evolution. He'd come up maybe he'd do what Francis Crick does and says, well, aliens planted that here. I always like this one. This is something that Bob Inyard had put on his website. This one I think is powerful. It's the trochlea of the eyeball. Look at this here. How is mistakes in the DNA and natural selection going to do this? Through a sling. Do you really, the faith an evolutionists must have to believe that this can happen by mistakes in the DNA and natural selection, a blind natural selection. You know what's even more interesting, what makes this even more difficult? How many eyes do we have? This has to happen on the other side of the head. I mean, it's remarkable. And we're not even talking about how incredibly complex the eye is and how it transfers information to the brain, etc. Romans 1:18-20, the creationists, one of their favorite verses, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, like the trochlea that we just saw, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So on Judgment Day, they won't be able to say, well, there is 97% chimp-human similarity. First of all, that was always wrong. But they won't have any reason. The evidence is overwhelming. You have to, we didn't see who built this building, but we can tell, we have intelligence, we have common sense, we know that this was done by design, that somebody designed this, some people. This wasn't put together by a tornado through a junkyard. So to believe that things like the trochlea happened by chance over time, by mistakes, they'll be without excuse. So here's another one. I hear this all the time. There is no evidence for a global flood. They'll say that there's evidence for global flood on Mars, and there's no water on Mars yet. I mean, maybe we found a little bit, maybe. Because they see contours and maybe there's a global flood on Mars. I think they said there was global warming on Mars. We talked about that too on the radio show. So I don't know if there was SUVs driving around up there we don't know about. Okay, so this is the evolutionist, you'll see this in their textbooks, and basically, this is like the cutout of the Grand Canyon. So they believe there's millions, this is their timeline is there's millions of years between all these gaps. Millions of years, etc. So when they look at the Grand Canyon, they see the Colorado River and they surmise that carved out the Grand Canyon over millions of years. Most high school textbooks still say that. That is such a myth. We know that from Mount St. Helens that can happen in a matter of hours. Not days or months, but a matter of hours of mud flows cutting through rock like butter. It's amazing. In fact, cavitation is the process I want to talk about. And Bill, I think it was you, but I'm not positive, who said that they saw the National Geographic show where the Hoover Dam, when they opened the viaducts and the things were spitting out of the mountain because they had to let the water out because there was flooding going on. They had 3-foot thick cement in these viaducts, and when they opened those things up, it just tore them to pieces. Cavitation. Cavitation is, when water's traveling and it has to make a sudden turn, it's in bubbles form. These bubbles, and I don't have the slide here, but the amount of energy in those bubbles, in some cases, almost approaches a plasma. I mean, it's amazing. Because of that process, water will cut through rock like butter with no problem. People have no idea what water can do. It's incredibly corrosive. Okay, so, we experienced this. Look at this picture here. This is, we all know what happened in Colorado last year. Look at that. You think that happened in a matter of, was that over years, millions of years? Water can do remarkable things. Just remarkable. Okay, let's go here. Sorry about this. There you go. Okay, so we saw what water can do. Now consider this. Here's the Grand Canyon. The evolutionists will tell you that that's 6 million years between this layer and that layer. So in all that time, this big, long, flat gap, all that time, there was never any water to do an erosion. Where's the erosion? Where is the erosion? And we find these flat gaps all over the earth. Here's what Dr. Ariel Ross said. In fact, according to average erosion rates, many or all of the layers should be gone. Since they are there and flat, this indicates that the millions of years postulated for these gaps never occurred. These flat gaps are so common that they pretty much challenge the validity of the whole geologic time scale. So where is this rock? Here's a rock, and notice these layers that evolutionists say 6 million years or how many million years during these layers. Where's that rock? That rock is it's in the Grand Canyon. It's right there. The Grand Canyon was formed very quickly. Okay, just more examples. This is kind of taking you through stuff we've covered before, but rapid burial, you see a fish eating a fish. Polystrate trees, we see those buried all over the earth in vertical, like that vertically. And, supposedly there's millions of years between here. So the evolutionist has to say, well, that was a location where there's an upheaval or whatever. They've got all kinds of excuses. But it contradicts that location had to have been buried by a flood. Ken Ham is famous for saying billions of dead things buried in rock strata laid down by water all over the earth. So we find, fossil life, sea life buried everywhere. We find it. If I go to Home Depot right now and I says, okay, let's have a bet. I bet you I can find fossil in the gravel, marine fossil. I would win the bet. Anybody want to take me up on it? You can. So it might take me a while sometimes if I go to the wrong Home Depot. But the point is, they're all over the place. Mountain ranges have tons of marine fossils on them. And an interesting thing, too, is a lot of times we find them, most of the time, in a closed position if they're not already disarticulated. What does that mean? When a clam dies, it opens up. When you pick up the clams on the seashore like we did the first time we went to the beach with our family, and we take them back to the room and you put them in the sink and it starts to stink, it's because the closed ones are still alive. If we're finding closed seashells on mountain ranges, that means they were buried alive, and it maybe means that there was a flood at one time to get those seashells. Why are they on the mountains? So Moses said all the mountains were covered with floodwaters, and guess what? All the major mountain ranges are covered with seashells. Yet according to Bill Nye and a lot of evolutionists I debate, and a lot of, when you hear a public teacher teaching kids or whatever, there's no evidence for a global flood. Here's something very recent. I don't talk a lot about, so this is June 17th. They discovered an ocean 400 miles beneath our feet that could fill our oceans 3 times over. So Bill will have to have a talk afterwards about Walt Brown's hydroplate theory. I'm just giving you a hard time. There's good debate in the creation circles on the whole, how where the floodwaters, how the flood layers and whatnot were laid down. This discovery suggests that Earth's surface water actually came from within, fountains of the great deep, Bible, fountains of the great deep, rather than the prevailing theory of icy comets striking Earth billions of years ago. Okay, so I'm going to just really quickly, we'll go through some dinosaur slides, and then we'll talk about the best discovery, I think, in the last 100 years. And I think most people know what that is, but we'll get to it. So, dinosaurs for a long time were the evolutionists' favorite missionary, that was their missionary guy. They would start off even in, these Dr. Seuss books about dinosaurs being millions of years old, which is a contradiction to the Bible. It puts doubt in what the Bible is saying right in the first chapter. If you read a book and you can't trust what the first chapter says, why would you read the rest? Satan's very, very intelligent, and that's why he does that. So, that's why they push millions of years, among other reasons. So we had this is evidence we've seen we've been able to share with people for many years. We know that the Indians were drawing pictures of dinosaurs, for example, in the Grand Canyon. And evolutionists don't dispute any of these pictures as legitimately being drawn by the Indians. They don't dispute that. When I used to, years ago, when I challenged them on this is not talked about as much because of what we'll see here later, but the more powerful evidence. But they would say two things. One, they got lucky, and they drew something that looked like a dinosaur. Does that look like they got lucky to draw something that looks remarkably like a pterodactyl? The other thing is that they also were paleontologists, and they were just drawing what they dug up in the fossil record. So they had all kinds of excuses, and we see these all over the place. We got ceremonial burial stones from Peru. What does that look like? That's a Triceratops. That's from 500 to 1500 AD. So figurines they found in Mexico, 10% of them were shapes of dinosaurs. There was a skeptic that went down there. He was a producer of Perry Mason's show. He dug under the chief of police's house and he found more, and he said, these are real. They saw dinosaurs. And he was a skeptic. The iguanodon, this was based on early fossils. They found some more. They still didn't have it right. And then, I don't know, about 10 years ago, let's see here if I can get the slide to come up. Sometimes this thing's real responsive, other times it's not. So, and I think this was around 10 years ago, they found fossilized tendons, so now they know the tail stood straight out. They didn't know that before. Well, those figurines that they found, they obviously saw that thing. Northern England is Bishop Richard Bell's tomb. And guess what's under that carpet? Dinosaur pictures. And he died in like 1400s. Here's a civilization in Cambodia from the 8th to 14th century. So there's a little podium there. And on that thing, you've got like monkeys, got elk, water buffalo, you got parrots. Oh, what else do we have? What is that doing there? Dinosaurs and people live together. We've always had evidence of that, always. Try to tell the Chinese that they've got a myth on their calendar. A lot of Chinese are real open to the idea that dinosaurs are just, or dragons are dinosaurs of the past. Are dinosaurs mentioned in the Bible? Yes. Is the word dinosaur in the Bible? Is the word internet in the Bible? No. Because that word wasn't invented. The word dinosaur wasn't invented until about, I think it was 1840s. So that's why we don't find that word, but we find descriptions of dinosaurs. Behold now the behemoth, which I made with thee. He eats grass as an ox. He moves his tail like a cedar. His bones are as strong as pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. This is a huge creature. He moves his tail like a cedar. Dinosaurs have probably gone extinct mostly by the time that they were translating this into English. You got old encyclopedias, by the way, that said that dragons were rare but still in existence. But they were fading out because we were killing them off. So they didn't know what it was, so they said it was a hippopotamus or an elephant. So we can do a test here. Is that a cedar tree? They said they thought it was an elephant. Well, let's do the test. That doesn't work. Hippopotamus doesn't work. Now let's get the next one here. I bet the next one works. There we go. It's a description of a dinosaur. Leviathan is a fire-breathing dragon mentioned in the Bible. And evolutionists will mock that and say that's crazy. How can you have that? And yet we've got creatures today that do something not exactly, but pretty similar. I mean, the bombardier beetle, the amount of heat that it produces as a defense mechanism is incredible. And for evolution to explain that is remarkable because it's two separate chambers of chemicals that have to be shot out and meet together and explode. How did that evolve? I mean, there would have been a lot of dead bombardier beetles until that mechanism figured itself out. Okay, so we know that current life does that. So what about dinosaurs? Is it possible that they could have... look at this guy. This is interesting because if you put vegetation in an environment that is compressed with no oxygen, what do you get? Vegetation, you get methane gas. So cows, when they burp methane gas. A lot of times if you take a cigarette lighter, you'll get a flame torch. Don't recommend anybody do that. So anyways, that thing with the right mechanism to trigger, it could have been a mechanical trigger, it could have been an electrical trigger. We've got electric eels, we've got animals that have electric mechanisms. Something could have triggered his ability to shoot a flame. It's totally possible. Now here's the big discovery, and it was interesting when this first happened because this is an old slide of mine. This slide is probably, we're 2014. This slide's probably 7 years old at least. So when I was showing this slide and witnessing to people like at work and whatnot, first of all, now it's become our great missionary lizard because people are shocked to see that we're finding soft tissue in dinosaurs. When we first discovered this, the evolutionist explanation was you're finding biofilm. You're not finding the original material. It's still a fossil. So I don't know, about 5 years ago, they actually extracted this soft tissue. That's out of a T-Rex bone. There's no way that thing is millions of years old. So here's what Mary Schweitzer said, that the doctor who found that. It was totally shocking. The finding certainly shows fossilization does not proceed as science had assumed. Discover magazine said it was her dangerous discovery. I mean, it throws the whole paradigm of dinosaurs being millions of years old. It refutes it. You know, they're still in denial because they bow to evolution. But this is powerful evidence. And it keeps getting worse for them. I mean, we've got tissue from an 80 million supposed year-old hadrosaur. And now we've got amino acid chains that have been sequenced at Harvard University. Harvard University now agrees it's not original material. They're totally on board. 10 of the bigger universities in the country all agree it's original dinosaur material that they're finding, not this biofilm. Remember, there's a 70 million year old mosasaur that they found tissue from. And then remember Archaeopteryx? They said that was an evolutionary intermediate between dinosaurs and birds. Well, now this thing's supposed to be 150 million years old, but they found soft tissue and remnants of the feathers. It can't be that old. That stuff breaks down very rapidly. And you know, the evolutionists just don't get it. But here's, let's look at it. And, here's evolution versus creation predictions. Let's look at this again. This is on Rational Wiki. And I've actually been showing this slide now for a year, and I forgot to update the date. I guarantee you this is still on Rational Wiki. I updated it for that high school talk I gave. So here they are. They say that, okay, here's a prediction. You shouldn't find any DNA in dinosaur bones. Because they say if fossils of the dinosaurs were less than 6,000 years old, detectable fragments of DNA should be present. Okay? And they admit up here, science has shown under very, very favorable conditions, 15 degrees, neutral pH, all these things have to be very favorable. They figure, and those are themselves are still pretty favorable assumptions for them. They admit that after 100,000 years, there should be no DNA left. It has a very short half-life, like 500 years. DNA breaks down very easily. So here's Rational Wiki saying that, okay, there's no way dinosaurs are recent, 6,000 years old, because, hey, you should find DNA in them, and you're not. So here they admit the 100,000 years, and they say you should not find any detectable fragments of DNA. Guess what the journal Bone reported in January of 2013? These data are the first to support preservation of multiple proteins and to present multiple lines of evidence for material consistent with DNA and fossils. So much for another prediction of evolution and another prediction of creation that's come true. We found DNA in dinosaur bones. There's no way that dinosaur bone is millions of years old. The evolutionists are admitting it right here when they say that it can't last 100,000 years under favorable conditions. I'm surprised they haven't torn down this web page, but I'll keep showing it until they tear it down. Okay. So that was another thing that we had on the, okay, let's see. Oh, do you have, I should have asked before, I don't know if you got sound hooked up. Does sound come through the computer? If not, it's not a big deal. Does it? Okay. Let's see if it works. Doesn't. Well, we'll see. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal. This is not a crucial piece of information for you. Okay. I'm not too worried about it. There's a little thing over here, mate. Whoops. I'm going to show you all the things. And I was going to do those one by one, but now we're not going to. These are all the excuses for what happened to dinosaurs. They say that a meteor hit the world, but a lot of scientists admit that that's not what happened. What really happened, well, what they claim is they came up with all these ideas. The Death Star, this was something that would every 20 million years shoot out comets and wipe out the dinosaurs. The reason they said that was because the dinosaurs just don't vanish in the fossil record. Other scientists said, well, cataracts led to blindness. Others said shrinking brain led to stupidity, chronic constipation, overeating, starvation, poisonous plants, mass suicide. I never really got that one. I don't know if they found bones at the bottom of a cliff and they were all dead. Dino wars. These last two I heard on Bill O'Reilly, AIDS, and then last year global warming. I'm surprised I never, where's George Bush? He should be on here somewhere. Anyways, the part you didn't get to hear was it's silly, but it's Star Wars, the dun, 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 while I show each one of those. Okay, so what really happened to them? Well, they would have been on the ark, but the ones we find in the fossil record were buried in the global flood. So, were there dinosaurs on the ark? Yeah, according to the Bible, there would have been. 2 of every sort shall be brought on the ark. So they survived the flood. Did the ark look like that? No, it looked like that, according to the dimensions in the Bible, which, by the way, South Korean ship architects modeled the dimensions in the Bible, built a model of the ark, and they couldn't capsize it. They amplified that tsunami that occurred several years ago, and it's built perfect for stability. So the ark was huge. There it is compared to a football field. And it'd give you a rough idea of the estimated number of animal kinds. Now, this number has actually gone down. I mean, this was an estimate that's about 10 years old by creation scientists. This number is much lower than that, and I can't remember, I think it's 9,000 now. But even if it's 16,000, you would only need to take up 15 railroad cars, and this is about 522 worth of railroad cars. So the ark was plenty big enough to hold all the animal life that we see on Earth today. Now, does that mean we had to have all the species on the ark? No. There's like 15 North American jackrabbit species. You only needed one jackrabbit kind to go on the ark. They're classified as different species because their population's isolated and they no longer interbreed, and so the scientist says that's another species. But if you put them back together, over time they figure it out and they interbreed again. They're still rabbits. Okay. How could Noah put all the big dinosaurs on the ark? I know a lot of you have heard these before. You don't have to take the senior citizens, and I apologize to the audience for that remark, but it's true. You take the younger ones. And there it was compared to a big cruise ship. There it is compared to the Titanic. Fared much better than the Titanic. Okay, here's something else from the debate. He brought up one of evolution's big darlings, Tiktaalik. It's supposedly this fish lizard, as he called it. And so they believe that, life came out of the ocean, and so they have to find an intermediate of something coming out of the ocean to turn into a mammal so that we can then evolve on Earth. God's got a sense of humor. There's whales in the ocean which are mammals, so they have to figure out how how mammals went back into the ocean. That's a whole other dream. So anyways, what was the problem with this? Again, Ken Ham knows these arguments, but in this particular case, he doesn't have enough time to deal with it. So this one kind of was left unanswered, and I'll answer it here. So this was August of 2006 is when they found this, and they were real happy with themselves. In the New York Times, it said they found a long-sought missing link. So again, like that other article I showed you earlier, aren't they kind of admitting that the link really has been missing? They tell us there isn't a missing link, and then here they find something that's, hey, this is really cool. The long-sought missing link. There's one problem with this argument. Well, there's a lot, but what Bill Nye, he's so behind on the times. His own scientists, secular scientists have refuted this. Guess what happened in January 2010, 4 years later? What they found, and I'll show you the quote if I can get it to highlight here. They found footprints in 10 million years, in strata that's 10 million years old, or footprints of tetrapods, mammals. So this thing is supposed to evolve and be evolving into a mammal, but the mammal it's evolving into was walking around 10 million years before that thing came along. Now, how is that possible? That doesn't work. That totally refutes Tiktaalik, and yet that was one of the evidences he brings up in the debate. He was real proud of that one. Here's what an evolutionist said. He said, these results force us to reconsider our whole picture of the transition from fish to land animals. It throws that missing link right back into the missing link pile. I wanted to show these. I've showed these for a while. This is in the college textbook of mine. The evolutionary origin of the highly modified order of mammals is becoming increasingly well documented. So this is a case where they got to figure out how the whale got back into the water, the mammal. So this is their idea. And they say it's becoming increasingly well documented. This is a just so story. Here's the drawing in the textbook, in the college textbook. And this is his first piece of evidence. Among the important recent discoveries is Pakicetus, known from a skull. Okay, from a skull, they're going to say that this thing is a mammal turning into a whale. Well, get out the baloney detector. And what did they really find anyways? That's all they really found. They found 2 pieces of a skull. And out of that, they drew that. And we've got another show that we do on our radio program. Once a month, we've got a different list show that we do. And we do a list of missing transitional fossils. And here's a quote from an evolutionist. He said, a major problem in proving the theory has been the fossil record. This record has never revealed traces of Darwin's hypothetical intermediate variants. Instead, species appear and disappear abruptly, just like we'd expect if creation is true. And this anomaly has fueled the creationist argument that each species was created by God. Now, we don't say each species was created by God. We say that each kind was created by God, right? Because there's many, God programmed a great variety in our animals. We see it in our dogs. We had that slide earlier. We see it in just how, the different variety of rabbits, tigers, and lions. They interbred at one time probably, right? Maybe just one of those kind came off the ark because you can breed a tiger and a lion, tigon and a liger. And then you can breed a camel and a llama. It's a comma. That is really what it's called, by the way, a comma. How old is the earth? Public schools teach 4.6 billion years. And Bible, 6,000 years. My personal favorite, I know all creationists have different ones. This has always been one of my favorites. And this is the thing that Dr. Russell Humphreys did. I had the privilege of talking with him before the results came out at a conference. So we've got these zircons, these in crystals that are in granite. And so what they discovered, there's helium in those. First of all, you wouldn't expect helium in these rocks if they're billions of years old, because helium is a noble gas and it's real slippery and it should not be in the rock anymore. It should be long gone. So Dr. Humphreys and his team of scientists came up with a prediction. They said, we're going to measure the diffusivity, how quickly this, the helium gets out of the rock against temperature, and let's run an experiment. So before they did the experiment, actually, they did math and whatnot, and they said, based on these numbers here, if the rock is 6,000 years, this temperature versus this rate of leaving the rock, this is what you'd see. If evolution is true, you would see this, if the rock is 1.5 billion years old. So he published this in a journal before the data was done, okay? So then they went to a mining company that was friendly with creationists. They didn't want to go directly to a lab that would do this experiment because if they knew they were creationists, they wouldn't do the experiment. So they had to do it through a private party that was a mining company. So what happened? So I was with Dr. Humphrey, or I talking to him at a conference, and he's like, all the data's coming in, and it's exciting. And then about 6 months later, they were able to publish it in a creation journal. And here's what Dr. Humphrey says. This is, by the way, here's where the data came in, right here. That's where the data came in from an independent lab that's an evolutionary run lab. They did this experiment, and look where the data came in. Dr. Humphreys, who has a PhD from LSU, astrophysics, and worked at Sandia Labs. He's a prestigious scientist. He's retired now. But anyways, this sequence of events places the burden of disproof on the critics because they must explain how, if there's no truth to our model, that the data accidentally, by sheer coincidence, just happened by blind chance to fall right on the predictions of our model. That's the way science is supposed to work. He made a prediction. He published it. About 2 years later, the data came out, and it confirmed it. There's many more examples that I'm not going to spend too much time, but we go through, we have our list of not-so-old things. That's a fun show that we do on our program. And so we talked earlier about galaxy spirals missing millions of years of deformation. You know, comets, as they go around the sun, they lose about 3 to 5% of their mass. So comets should be gone after 100,000 years. So evolutionists can't explain where they came from. They claim there's an Oort cloud that produces them. Well, the Oort cloud is a phantom of their imagination. There's no evidence for an Oort cloud. Now, we believe, I say we, this is more controversial. This is an idea held by most creationists. I'd say some, maybe, I don't know what percentage. Some of us believe that comets came from the Earth during the fountains of the Great Deep and all the stuff that went up in the atmosphere and into space. Because they are ice balls, after all. But that's controversial. Magnetic field is decaying too fast. We've been able to measure the magnetic field for like over 150 years, I think now. And it's showing a rate of decline that if you go back far enough, the Earth cannot possibly be 4.6 billion years old. We've got DNA that we've extracted now from something that's supposed to be 130 million years old. We've got fossilized school of jellyfish in 7 million year old layers. So they find all these jellyfish in layers that were supposed to be laid down over actually 1 million years. Let's say, 7 million year layers. So that had to be laid down rapidly. Mitochondrial Eve, they did a study on the rate of mutation of the mitochondria. And mitochondria is only transferred, the women transfer it to the, it comes through the mom, We all have mitochondria DNA, but we get it from our mom. And they were able to measure the rate. When they first measured the rate, it showed that mitochondrial Eve was like 100,000 years old, so that delighted the evolutionists. Well, they didn't have enough data. It was just based on very speculative, very small sample of data. Then they got a pile of data in, and it showed that she was 6,000 years old. And, of course, the author of that journal, that article in Science Journal said, well, that can't be the case. So you know how they solved that problem? They got her back to 100,000 years old, and the way they did it is they mixed in chimp DNA because they're assuming that we're related to chimps. But if you don't do that, she's 6,000 years old. And of course, Jesus was a young earth creationist. He appealed to Genesis more than any other book in the Bible. Okay, this one I think is really cool. This is a recent discovery as far as what we found out here recently. I think you'll like this. So NASA's WMAP satellite showed that some hot and cold spots in the cosmic background radiation are not distributed randomly as expected, but are aligned along what the scientists dubbed the axis of evil. So what's going on here? So our planets and our sun are in an ecliptic plane. I wanted to kind of give you an idea of this. The planets from the sun are actually skewed by maybe 7 to 8%. So if you looked at it from the top, it would kind of look like that, and from the side like that, which is remarkable in itself, that we're in the same ecliptic plane in the universe. That in itself is evidence of design. So here's what a scientist said. What is intriguing even further is why such anisotropies. Now, anisotropies is a scientific term for fluctuations in temperature that they're measuring. Okay, so these basically hot and cold spots. Why these anisotropies should lie about a great circle decided purely by the orientation of the Earth's rotational axis and or the axis of its revolution around the sun. And the sun, let me show you another one here. So again, that's the ecliptic plane. And I got this from one of the scientists working on this, not from him personally, from his website on the internet. So this gives you an idea what they're seeing. They're seeing more variation of warm on this side of the ecliptic plane than on this side, and it lies right on the ecliptic plane. I mean, first of all, how does the Big Bang produce that? It can't. This refutes the Big Bang, okay? And this also kind of puts an important picture on the fact that it goes right through the ecliptic plane and right through, aligned with the Earth's rotational axis. That's amazing. So, they said this: modern cosmology is built on the assumption that the universe is essentially the same in whichever direction we look. If the cosmic radiation has a preferred direction, that assumption may have to go along with our best theories about cosmic history. Another scientist said the discovery casts doubt on all contemporary concepts of the nature and development of the universe. So, they were hoping that the Planck telescope would come to the rescue. This is what they said. This disaster might be averted if we can show that the axis arises from some oddity in the way our telescopes and satellites observe the radiation. Because this is kind of like mitochondrial lead. They had data, but they didn't have a ton of it. So they're going to get a lot more data from the Planck telescope. And they said the European Space Agency's recently launched Planck Space Telescope might settle the issue when it makes the most sensitive maps yet of the cosmic background radiation. Until then, the axis of evil continues to terrorize us. Why does it terrorize them? Because it goes against an atheist worldview and a view of the Big Bang that goes against the Bible. Well, so I think it was last year, the data is in from the Planck telescope. The fact that the Planck has made such a significant detection of these anomalies erases any doubts about their reality. It can no longer be said that they are artifacts of the measurements. They are real, and we have to look for a credible explanation. We're not hearing about this at all in the news, are we? I mean, this is a huge discovery. This is another big one you never hear about. Yet you'll still hear snippets on the news about evidence for inflation theory, which, by the way, that particular story, they recently, evolutionists themselves have refuted that. I was going to put that slide up and I forgot. That's just like a week ago. You just can't trust what you know that it's going to get refuted, a lot of times by even their own scientists. This is powerful evidence. What's going on here? That's evidence of design, and there's no way there was a Big Bang. It refutes it completely. But of course, just like the Y chromosome is horrendously different, that's not a scientific term. Why do they call it the axis of evil? It's because it goes against it's evil to them. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their sight. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. Okay, so we're getting towards the end here. We've got another prediction by evolution. Bill Nye, evolution makes predictions. Okay, well, they said this in the Carnegie Institute for Science. Today, the universe is filled with galaxies that have largely stopped forming stars, a sign of galactic maturity. But in the distant past, galaxies were still actively growing by consuming gas and turning it into stars. This means that mature galaxies should have been almost non-existent when the universe was still young. So when they're looking at way, way, way back in what they think is the beginning of the universe with the Hubble telescope, they would not expect to find mature galaxies. This is what they found, and this is reported here just recently. We just covered on the radio show, May 14th. 15 mature galaxies were found at a record-breaking average distance of 12 billion light years when the universe was just 1.6 billion years old, very young in their view. The finding raises new questions about how these galaxies form so rapidly and why they stopped forming stars so early. It is an enigma that these galaxies seem to come out of nowhere. Again, another prediction that they made that's not true and that it matches creation. Okay, last part. I'm going to go through this. If you missed Kevin Anderson's talk, it was Rob Carter that did this, excuse me. He did something on this. I wanted to go through it because I think we've got a little bit of a slightly different take than Rob Carter does on this at Real Science Radio. So this is kind of a Real Science Radio exclusive. In the Bible it says, now the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Japheth, I don't know if I said that right, Japheth. I intentionally left a part out here. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated, and I'll share those later. So let's give you a concept of what's going on and what Rob Carter presented. So we know from the Tower of Babel that the Lord came down and saw the city which the sons of men had built, and he said, indeed the people are one, and they all have one language. Come let us, Trinity there, go down and there, confuse their language that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building that city. So from the Tower of Babel, all the people of the world spread out. And what's interesting is when we look at genetics, it fits the Bible perfectly. So what Rob Carter presented was, so these were the families of the sons of Noah according to their generations and their nations, and from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. So let's take a look. We talked earlier about the Y chromosome, okay? So there's no variation, not much variation. Well, there's no variation found in the non-coding introns. So we all trace back to a single male ancestor. We all trace back, there would have been only one Y chromosome on the ark. So that's what we're finding in genetics. No variation in the Y chromosome, not much. So that points back to one man, which is actually Noah. I mean, you could argue Adam, but Noah and all his sons, there's one Y chromosome on the ark. That's it. Mitochondrial DNA, we mentioned earlier that the females pass the mitochondrial DNA on. So how many women were on the ark? 4. Rob Carter said that there's 3 mitochondrial DNA populations in the world. So he believes it's from the daughters of Noah. Okay? We say no. We say, Real Science Radio says there's 4, and I'm going to show you how. And the scientific community says it all goes back to mitochondrial Eve. Here's the key. These are the groups that Rob Carter is referring to. M, N, and R. But there's this group here that some people, and I think Rob wanted to put into other groups, but we have this type right here in Africa that's predominantly just Africans. Okay? So now we are going to share with you, when I say we, Bob Inyard and I are going to share with you our idea, and you know, take it for what it's worth. We think there's 4 groups, and let's look at the Bible. From Leviticus, and there's other places. None of you shall approach anyone near kin to uncovered nakedness. I am the Lord. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father. The man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. God is providing a clue, a polite way of saying what uncovering nakedness is. Whoops, went too far. So here's what happened in the Bible, and I debate atheists a lot, and they'll bring this up. And I used to have a hard time explaining it, and I don't think I do anymore. He drank wine, and he was drunk, and became uncovered in his tent, and Ham, and the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father. You know how many times atheists have made fun of the Bible? They're like, why do you curse somebody because you found the nakedness of his father? I say there's a lot worse thing that went on here than people realize. Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Now, according to other passages in the Bible, the nakedness of his father means that the person slept with the mom, the mother. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him, and said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. Imagine a kid who has a mother and a grandmother who's the same person. I mean, that's a curse in itself. He'd be made fun of. We submit that that's what happened. We've got 4 different places, if you look in the Bible, where you look up the nakedness of if you uncover the nakedness of your uncle, that means you've slept with his wife, etc. There's more examples. There's like 3 or 4 We believe that's what happened, and that's why Canaan was cursed. And that's why we think that's a little part I left out. And Ham was the father of Canaan. And then these were the people who populated the earth. We think there's 4. Why is this in here? And from these, this is included, from these the whole earth was populated. Nevertheless, the Bible, regardless of whether you think it's 3 or 4, it fits well with the Bible. Finally, origin of language. Darwin said language slowly and unconsciously be developed by many steps from primitive language consisting of grunts. This has been disproven over the years. People with the least complex cultures have sophisticated languages with complex grammar and large vocabularies, can name and discuss anything that occurs in the sphere occupied by their speaker. The oldest language that can reasonably be reconstructed is already modern, sophisticated, and complete from an evolutionary point of view. There's no evolutionary evidence of language. And here's what MIT professor Noam Chomsky said: many attempts have been made to determine an evolutionary origin of language, and all have failed. And I'll close with this in a couple of slides at the end, but this is something that he's not here tonight, but one of our, Dr. Ed Holroyd, really cool stuff that he shared with us before. If you look at the Chinese language and how, the Chinese language, it's symbols, and each symbol means a certain word. For example, if you break the word boat out, it's vessel, 8, people. Now, I actually showed this to in my church, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And, yeah, it was at least then, because I was still working at Trimble, and there's a reason I mentioned that. There was a lady in our class who was American, but she had been in China for like 10 years. And she was a teacher and said that I was wrong. And I said, okay. She said, that's not really the symbol for 8. I'm like, well, let me look into it. She said, it's a different symbol. And very conveniently, at that time, I was working at Trimble, and my manager was Chinese woman. So I asked her this question: what is that? I told her what happened. I said, there's a lady in my class, or I mentioned this to a lady that I know, and she said that's not the symbol for 8. And she goes, well, it's not, but it used to be. And I could never find that lady again. She never came to the Bible study. I think she was a visitor. I was really bummed. I mean, come on, male pride. This is a symbol for 8. That my Chinese manager confirmed that. So, because I was going to stop using this if it wasn't true. I'm not going to ever show anything that I don't think is accurate. So that really is the word for 8, but it's not used anymore. But it was the old version of 8 in Chinese. To create, if you break those symbols out, speak, dust, mud, life. And there's tons of examples. I'm only showing you a couple. There's so much more I could show you. I just want to show you that their language goes back to Genesis. Forbidden to warn, if you break that out, 2 trees and God. So, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. So we have to be prepared, because you're going to get people saying things like on that Facebook post that my brother dealt with last night, that all wars are caused by religion, and he was someone who doesn't like Christians. Faith, according to the Webster's Dictionary, is belief and trust and a loyalty to God, okay? Belief in the traditional doctrines of religion, firm belief in something for which there is no proof. I mean, that's what a lot of people attribute faith to, the secular people. But what's the Bible's definition of faith? We have it in Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. That kind of fits maybe 1. And it's also the evidence of things not seen. Christ did not expect us to just believe without evidence. The Apostle Paul didn't expect us to believe without evidence. So Jesus said, John the Baptist has sent us to you saying, someone coming to Jesus, John the Baptist has sent us to you saying, are you the coming one, or do we look for another? So what was Jesus' response? Was it ye of little faith? No, it was, go and tell John the things you have seen and heard, that the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor of the gospel preached to them, and blessed is he who is not offended because of me. I watched a really cool movie, The Book of John, very well done. It's verse by verse, word by word, very well produced, and you just go through the Book of John, it's word for word. It's real interesting to watch that, because it almost gives a new perspective of how Jesus is pleading with these people and saying, look at all the evidence I'm giving you, all the miracles I'm doing, and you still don't believe me. It's almost more powerful to watch that and just see what he was dealing with on a constant basis of people not believing him. And he was providing them powerful evidence. So our, creationist apologetics, favorite verse, one of them, and do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. I was when I first started doing this, because there would be things that they would present to me, and I wasn't familiar with the argument. When I first got into it, I wanted to defend the Bible, and I'd hear these things like, wow, I don't know. But now I'm not, because I know that there's an answer. I may not have it, but I know that I can really trust God's word. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. And I think that's it. So thank you very much. And I think we're going to have a question and answer session. I'll do the best I can in that. So,
Chris, yes, thank you. We're going to take a few minutes for question and answers, but instead of running the mic around the auditorium, we're going to ask you to come to the microphone to speak. And the reason for that is that we can get you on camera if you do that, okay? So if you have any questions, we're going to allow 10 more minutes, John, and then we're going to quit, okay? All right. Please come forward if you have questions.
Okay, that's it. Thank you. No.
The name is Sheldon Valera, and I'm from Colorado Springs, and I could go on for a while, but I'll keep my questions brief and to the point. Number one, I had a conversation with my pastor last week, and I thought he was a young earther. Not that it's a make or break deal, but it turns out that he wasn't. And he said there's multitudes of evidence to show that it's an old earth. I would like to, I don't want to say witness to my pastor, but I'd like to at least give him the evidence for a young earth. Where would you direct me, or what one thing would you at least have me start with to respond to that with meekness and fear?
Okay, great question. I think the first thing I would do personally, and everybody's different, I would first tell them, get it on good ground to say this is not a salvation issue, okay? And then maybe at some point you mentioned how it is a slippery slope issue, because would you say yours is a conservative church or?
Very conservative.
Very conservative. Because every church that no longer believes in Christ or that we would view extremely liberal, for example, United Methodist Church, they take their parishioners to Planned Parenthood to get abortions. So you've got a scale of churches from conservative to liberal. We do not know of a single example of a liberal church that did not begin with a compromise on Genesis. It's a slippery slope. Once you start giving in on that one, then what else in history are you going to question in the Bible? So I don't know if you bring that to them right away, but that's why it is important. It's not a salvation issue, but it's important because of what it can do to your church. YoungEarth.com is a site that has a lot of the evidences for a young earth. That's one site I'd recommend. Of course, I'd recommend Answers in Genesis. I'd probably recommend creation.com even more so, but this is personal preference. But to get him rolling, I would even say a lot of times they're not going to do the research themselves. I would present with him, maybe try to get into discussion with him, and maybe if you had some of the stuff you could present. The thing I mentioned here about the helium and zircons, if that's a little bit too much, you can go to YoungEarth.com and look for other arguments. Another favorite of mine is, again, it's a personal favorite, and I don't know how it works for other people, is you could talk to him about the dinosaur soft tissue. That's powerful. A lot of people don't know about that. Carbon-14. Carbon-14 is something that's radioactive. It turns into nitrogen over time. Its half-life is like 5,600 years. So 5,600 years, carbon-14 is going to turn back into nitrogen, half of it. So you can only take carbon-14 back and date something maybe 50,000 years semi-accurately. After 100,000 years, you won't have any. So why am I telling you this? Because we find carbon-14 in diamonds that are mined, hundreds of feet from beneath the Earth's surface that have carbon-14 in it. If the diamond is millions of years old, why does it have something in it that should have long decayed and been gone and turned into nitrogen? That's a powerful argument for a young Earth, but again, that's just a personal favorite, and I don't know if that works, how well that works, because maybe it's too scientific. I would just engage him personally, because I don't know if he's going to go out to a website. He might.
Second question. I want to go way off course. It's just something that I've noticed. I don't know if anybody else has. The one thing you didn't talk about was Lucy. I mean, there's other examples of the so-called missing link.
Yep.
But I've noticed it in society today, and maybe it's just me being maladjusted, but it seems like a good amount of the movies that are coming out, they're driving home an evolutionary theme. Lucy's one of them. When I first saw it, I was like, wait a minute. And it took me a while to realize what was happening. I think personally that it's a take off of that. And just like with the Planet of the Apes movie, here you have the evolutionary theme. And I'm going to close on that and give somebody else a chance.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a good question too. Well, first of all, the discoverer of Lucy now admits that Lucy's not on the human chain because of other findings. Other evolutionist scientists say that Lucy is merely an extinct type of bonobo. If you go to the bonobo website, it says that bonobos are closely resemble Australopithecus afarensis, which is Lucy. And if you look at Lucy's skull and put it next to a bonobo, guess what? They're virtually identical. So Lucy is an extinct bonobo. And here's the thing, other evolutionists say that that's true. They agree with us. So if that is such a powerful argument, why can't you get why doesn't all the evolutionists agree with you? There's plenty of evolutionists that say that Lucy's just an extinct bonobo. Lord Solly Zuckerman was well known for his research into man's history, and he said that the field of anthropology is the worst field in sciences. And he said that Lucy's just to quote him, a bloody ape. And he was an evolutionist. But he was frustrated with all the nonsense that they were pushing based on speculative evidence. Here's a funny thing we got a question back there. So there was a program on Nova where the theory was that the reason why Lucy's pelvis was so ape-like was because somebody stepped on it. So what did he do? You see it on the program. You see a bone saw, and you see the bone parts flying off. He's recarving the pelvis to make it more human-like because he said it was stepped on and it made it look chimp-like. So they're creating evidence after the fact. It's amazing the steps an evolutionist will go to try to support their theory.
This is about the young year. So if we calculate the rate of growth of our population, today it's only 7 billion or a little bit more. But if what they're claiming is true, the population has to be 7,000 billion. It cannot be 7 billion.
Yeah, so that's another great argument against an old Earth is where are all the Stone Age graves of all these people that would have had to have lived if man has been around for hundreds of thousands of years. And I'm sorry I forgot the Planet of the Apes thing is a great question. Because if you watch the original Planet of the Apes, they really push evolution in that. In fact, that's where they came from. So I don't know. I think it's still bad. The new one, I haven't seen the new one. I saw the one before. What's interesting about it, though, is I wonder if we're making a little bit of headway because in that one, he's only an ape because of a mutation. It's a current information change that made this ape be able to talk. So at least maybe we're making progress. I don't know. I still think they're pushing that, but not like they did in the original Planet of the Apes. It was evolution. They said evolution. I don't know if they've said it in the current movie. They didn't in the last one. It was all about this monkey had this mutations put into him and manipulated. He was manipulated to become able to talk and more intelligent. So that's my pretty poor commentary on Planet of the Apes. Any more questions? One more, I think. Yep, probably time for one more.
I was listening to Real Science Radio today. My name's John. Bob Enyart was talking about the earthquake predictions, and I was just really fascinated by the information they had on that program today. I'm kind of giving them a little hurrah here because they're really got some good stuff on that program, but could you tell us a little bit more about that and how it fits into some of the various models of creation?
Okay. So, yeah, and I wish Bob was here today because he's definitely more versed on the earthquakes. So my understanding of it is there are a couple of things, and I'm not, this was a pre-recorded show that I actually wasn't able to do, sorry. So, so I'm a little, what I do know about the earthquakes is they're not finding the ones they expect, and this is not going to sit well with some of our people here, with plate tectonics, because they're not deep earthquakes. And Bill, I may have that wrong. Is it the one they're not finding shallow or deep? It's one. I think it's because they're not deep earthquakes. And if plate tectonics is true, you'd expect that. So that's one of the problems with the earthquakes. The other thing is that I find interesting. In fact, it was one of my favorite shows in the last 2 years. And I didn't cover it tonight because I ran out. I just didn't have time. I mean, and I'm sorry I ran over. There's so much stuff out there. But another one that's super cool is when earthquakes occur. People have been reporting for hundreds of years that they see lightning coming up from the surface. They see earthquake lights. And you can go look it up on the internet, and even Wiki will talk about earthquake lights. Scientists pretty much now accept it as true. They've proven it, that and there's still a debate on what's causing the lights, but they say it's true. You get lightning strikes from the ground. So, there's a Paleozoic effect, and I don't know exactly all the physics behind it, but granite creates a potential, and if you got all these rocks moving around, that you can get these earthquake lights. Dr. Walt Brown believes that that's where the origin of radioactivity came from, was from the global flood created all this. If you think about creation when everything was perfect, we wouldn't have had radioactivity, because radioactivity causes birth defects and other harm. So we don't believe, and I buy into that. To me, when the creation was completed on day 6, that everything was very good, there wouldn't have been no radioactivity. And we only find radioactivity, by the way, on the Earth's crust. We don't find it anywhere else. So it fits that same theory. So that's my understanding of it. If Bob Enyart was here, he could give you a lot better explanation because he's dug into that one more than I have. And I think someone they might have more on it. Yep, because as I said, I know that even in the secular community there's different opinions, but one of the opinions in the secular community matches Walt Brown's with this Paleozoic effect with the granite and the voltage potential that's created.
Okay, let's give Fred a big hand, okay?
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to retire now to the refreshments in the basement. Please join us, and as I'll remind you about the DVDs that I have for sale for Dr. Bergman's presentation, and if we're lucky, we may get one for Fred before the night's over. So John is going to be working on that while we have our fellowship time. So we'll see you downstairs.